I am so pleased to be here today because I'm excited to share with you, who's heard of the Green New Deal? Oh, you have. I've been traveling around the country recently and most people haven't heard of it. So I'm excited to share with you what they're about and what it kind of encompasses, as well as the book I just wrote about the millions of green jobs we need to create to build a sustainable future. But without further ado, I'd like to start with, I'm going to share with you.
Copies of the book are available.
Copies of the book are available. I have 9 copies in case anyone wants to get one if you're inspired afterwards. But let's start with some Sunrise Movement videos.
Democrats are introducing framework on the Green New Deal.
Green New Deal?
Green New
The
Deal.
Green New Deal. An environmental group called the Sunrise Movement. They call themselves the Sunrise Movement.
Bring it on, Koch brothers, because we have an activated sunrise revolution that's taking place.
We have 12 years to radically transform our economy and our society to stop this crisis and protect human civilization as we know it. We'll talk about it like that because that's what it is.
This is not about Republicans. This is not about the Democrats. This is about humanity. That's why we demand a new Green Deal, and we demand it right now.
Who has cared about climate change issues for years and known there's a problem for decades? And who's been volunteering or working on solutions or advocating in some way for us to rise to the scale of the challenge? I think these kids might be organized enough and have enough support to take it over the finish line, what we've been working on for so many years. And it's so exciting to see how angry and organized and supported and unwilling to take no for an answer they are. It's really cool. I've been in on some of the organizing calls, the policy calls, the meetings, and I'm in my early 50s, so I'm kind of hanging back, but I'm trying to see how I can best support them, whether it's money or asking for policy changes from legislators. So this is something I've done twice. I've been involved with Green New Deal town halls. There was a call from the Sunrise Movement to have these town halls around the country to explain what the Green New Deal, as they envision it, is about. And so I did one here in Palo Alto and was involved in one in Fremont. And basically, here's what we went over, and I was asked to come share the highlights of what we did. Talking about a solution that rises to the scale of the crisis, what the New Deal was, and how that set the stage for the Green New Deal that we'd like to see now, the promises of the Green New Deal and opportunities for job creation, and I'll explain that more in a minute, and then the pathway to victory.
Press F5 to show the slideshow full screen on the big monitor.
Okay. Here's a second video. Let me see.
That's how climate change and pollution has affected me. One of my most distinct memories growing up in Detroit was going south on I-75. Smelling the pollution coming from Marathon, seeing the smoke and the fire on the freeway. I remember trying to hold my breath as long as I could, and eventually you have to breathe in. I've lived in Detroit my whole life. We bounced around a lot when I was a kid. We couldn't always afford to pay rent, and neither could a lot of my friends and family. I know that the planet is on a path towards destruction, And I know that it's caused by the same people who produce the smells and the smoke on the freeway. Poor people, minorities, and young people like me are facing violence and threats in our lives every day from a system that treats us like resources to be extracted.
So this is my old neighborhood. The wall that separates Detroit and Grosse Pointe over there was a big site for dumpers. Like business owners usually would come and you'd see them dumping their trash, their tires, their roof shingles. These houses are all built, 50, some of them even 100 years ago across the city, and all of them are built with the methods of, asbestos, lead. In our own house, we had lead paint chips, and whenever these houses get knocked down and burned down, the neighborhood is affected by that. We breathe that air in.
I see these forces of oppression so clearly. I've come to realize, like a lot of young people, that it's our economy. An economy ruled by profit. An economy that needs our environment to be disposable and needs people to be disposable. At the same time, I was seeing videos of young people across the country going to their elected officials and demanding action on climate and pollution. I was arrested with other activists for sitting in at Nancy Pelosi's office and demanding a Green New Deal. Our generation is sick of a system that leaves us with no future and no hope for a better life. It's not you and me that has to change. It's the system that allows companies, shareholders, and billionaires to destroy our planet. The Sunrise Movement, to me, is about elevating young people to fight on the front lines of building a new, more just, more fair future. I've lived in pollution, in poverty, in climate change my whole life. As long as those things exist, I'll continue to struggle.
And to balance that out, here is a third short video on about a woman, Lily, in the South in Appalachia.
I'm 15. This is how climate change and pollution has affected my life. Growing up in eastern Kentucky is all about contrast. Contrast between lush Appalachian nature and sprawling extraction projects. I spent my childhood hiking and backpacking and developed a passion for the environment, the mountains, the woods. As I got older, I began to see how my environment was changing around me. We've gone from a deciduous forest to a temperate rainforest just in my lifetime. We've had 2 tornadoes in the last 6 years. Northeast Kentucky is seeing acid rain from all the mining projects, and the water is undrinkable in many communities. Climate change represents an existential fear all people my age share. Instead of worrying about things like college or what I want to do someday, I'm forced to worry about rising sea levels, more and more weather-related natural disasters, increasing famine and food insecurity. I joined Sunrise, and within weeks, I was on a bus with 70 other young people from Kentucky to demand Nancy Pelosi support a Green New Deal. When I came back to Kentucky, we started a Sunrise Hub here and immediately started organizing. Other young people I've met through Sunrise understand that we can't afford business as usual. We understand that we need massive, transformative change to our economy and politics in order for my generation to have any chance of a livable future. Corporations in eastern Kentucky accelerated climate change, and now our communities will be some of the most severely impacted. In just my lifetime, I've seen the climate change drastically. This is the fight of our lives, and I'm not going away anytime soon.
I'd like you to turn to the person next to you and answer this question. How are you seeing the impacts of climate change, pollution, and economic inequality in your life and your community? Please take 2 minutes.
I see a lot of that's an important question. Climate change effect. What I see is an attitude among a lot of people that don't care about what things look like. If you look around the Bay Area, everywhere you drive, everywhere you walk, there's trash on the ground. Unless you're in the woods, in the park.
I was saying, I see that most people are not trained to relate with trends for their life. The trends are temporary rising.
Are either of you seeing the impact of climate change?
Almost feel guilty about that.
So I'd like to hear from two separate people. How are you seeing the impacts of climate change, pollution, and economic inequality in your life and your community? Who would like to share? Yes, ma'am? The fires. Devastating. Yes, and you, sir?
Lucy was up in Churchill, Manitoba, about a year or 2 years ago, and she saw the polar bears with bones sticking out, no flesh on them, no food. Now, that's a dramatic instance of climate change affecting their environment, their lifestyle, and their survival.
That's, wow. Thank you for sharing that. Sorry? I heard wildfires, and I heard concern about emaciated polar bears up in Canada. Thank you.
Microphone.
Would you like to share?
I think one of the most disturbing things is hearing about the hundreds of people that are trying to live in their cars in the streets of the cities, and how the cities are not doing very well coping with it. They come up with a parking lot for 20 people when they've got 500 living in all over, in all of the cities. And it's ridiculous.
I hear a concern about housing issues, housing supply. Thank you. So what are we going to do about it? The Green New Deal is a discussion that's happening based on a resolution that was proposed back in February. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey announced a Green New Deal in February. It's only 14 pages, though. It's just a resolution. It gives the broad brushstrokes. It provides a framework, but it doesn't have details. And when I talked to one of AOC's, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's legislative aides, he said it was intended to be a framework, and now you all get to have a discussion about what you want it to be. So there have been rallies, there have been sit-ins, there has been activism, 200 town halls around the country, demanding a Green New Deal. Sorry? Sunrise Movement, yes. You walked in a little late. Mainly this is about the Sunrise Movement slides and what they're proposing. So I would like to show you a fourth video. This is the last one I have. It's a little longer. Let's see.
So that would just start the presentation.
Okay. I see. There we go.
The bullet train from New York to D.C. It always they saw themselves. I think there was something similar with the Green New Deal. We knew that we needed to save the planet and that we had all the technology to do it, but people were scared. They said it was too big, too fast, not practical. I think that's because they just couldn't picture it yet. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with how we got here. 1977, New York. A senior scientist named James Black made a presentation about how burning fossil fuels could eventually lead to global temperatures rising 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Within 2 years, one of the world's biggest supertankers was outfitted with a state-of-the-art lab to measure CO2 in the ocean, gathering more data about global warming. Guess who was doing all of this research? ExxonMobil, the oil and gas company. Oh yeah, Exxon knew this whole time, as did our politicians. 10 years later, James Hansen, NASA's top climate scientist, told Congress he was 99% certain that global warming was happening and caused by humans. That was 1988, the year before I was even born. So did Exxon listen to the science, including their own? Did they change business models, invest in renewables? No, the opposite. They knew and they doubled down. They and others spent millions setting up a network of lobby groups and think tanks to create doubt and denial about climate change. It was an effort designed to attack and dispute the very kind of science they themselves had been doing. And it worked. Politicians went to bat for fossil fuels, and these massive corporations kept digging and mining, drilling and fracking like there was no tomorrow. America became the biggest producer and consumer of oil in the world. Fossil fuel companies made hundreds of billions, while the public paid the lion's share to clean up their disasters. We lost a generation of time we'll never get back. Entire species will never get back. Natural wonders gone forever. And in 2017, Hurricane Maria destroyed the place where my family was from, Puerto Rico. It was like a climate bomb. It took as many American lives as 9/11. And in the next year, when I was elected to Congress, the world's leading climate scientists declared another emergency. They told us that we had 12 years left to cut our emissions in half, or hundreds of millions of people would be more likely to face food and water shortages, poverty, and death. 12 years to change everything. How we got around, how we fed ourselves, how we made our stuff, how we lived and worked, everything. The only way to do it was to transform our economy, which we already knew was broken, since the vast majority of wealth was going to just a small handful of people, and most folks were falling further and further behind. It was a true turning point. Lots of people gave up. They said we were doomed. But some of us remembered that as a nation, we'd been in peril before. The Great Depression, World War II. We knew from our history how to pull together to overcome impossible odds. And at the very least, we owed it to our children to try. The wave began when Democrats took back the House in 2018, and then the Senate and the White House in 2020, and launched the decade of the Green New Deal, a flurry of legislation that kicked off our social and ecological transformation to save the planet. It was the kind of swing for the fence ambition we needed. Finally, we were entertaining solutions on the scale of the crises we faced without leaving anyone behind. That included Medicare for All, the most popular social program in American history. We also introduced the federal jobs guarantee, a public option including dignified living wages for work. Funnily enough, the biggest problem in those early years was a labor shortage. We were building a national smart grid, retrofitting every building in America, putting trains like this one all across the country. We needed more workers. That group of kids from my neighborhood were right in the middle of it all, especially this one girl, Ileana. Her first job out of college was with AmeriCorps Climate, restoring wetlands and bayous in coastal Louisiana. Most of her friends were in her union, including some oil workers in transition. They took apart old pipelines and got to work planting mangroves with the same salary and benefits. Of course, when it came to healing the land, we had huge gaps in our knowledge. Luckily, indigenous communities offered generational expertise to help guide the way. Ileana got restless, tried her hand as a solar plant engineer for a while, but eventually made her career in raising the next generation as part of the Universal Child Care Initiative. As it turns out, caring for others is valuable, low-carbon work, and we started paying real money to folks like teachers, domestic workers, and home health aides. Those were years of massive change, and not all of it was good. When Hurricane Sheldon hit southern Florida, parts of Miami went underwater for the last time. But as we battled the floods, fires, and droughts, we knew how lucky we were to have started acting when we did. And we didn't just change the infrastructure, we changed how we did things. We became a society that was not only modern and wealthy, but dignified and humane too. By committing to universal rights like healthcare and meaningful work for all, we stopped being so scared of the future. We stopped being scared of each other, and we found our shared purpose. Ileana heard the call too, and in 2028 she ran for office in the first cycle of publicly funded election campaigns. And now she occupies the seat that I once held. I couldn't be more proud of her, a true child of the Green New Deal. When I think back to my first term in Congress, riding that old school Amtrak in 2019, all of this was still ahead of us. And the first big step was just closing our eyes and imagining it. We can be whatever we have the courage to see.
Is anyone feeling inspired?
Yes.
Okay. We're going to have questions at the end, so hold on to that thought. So we've done the New Deal. We did it to pull out of the Great Depression, and all these great new social programs that lifted people up were developed. We were fighting global fascism in World War II, and people were asked to plant victory gardens. And so during World War II, 40% of all the vegetables came out of people's backyards. It's an interesting movement now to look back at the New Deal to inspire us for the Green New Deal. And there are many forces who are saying, this shouldn't just be about decarbonizing our energy system. We have to include lots of different marginalized groups who we want to be as inclusive as possible. We want to include the labor groups. We want to include historically marginalized groups. A jobs guarantee was part of the call for the Civil Rights Act. But looking further back to the New Deal, a lot of people were put to work doing things that would benefit our country. We put our artists to work creating murals. We had this Civilian Conservation Corps in which 3 million unemployed young men were sent out to the countryside to build our park system and to plant 2 billion trees. There was the public works efforts to rebuild bridges and roads, and there was a second Bill of Rights saying that everyone has the right to a job a decent wage, a decent home, medical care, economic protection during sickness, accident, or old age, and a good education. We electrified rural areas. And we just want to make sure that everyone's included in the effort to lift us up and take us to the next level. So November 2018 was when the Sunrise Movement really kicked off. They had been organizing for years, but this is when they sat in on Nancy Pelosi's office and demanded green jobs for all and a Green New Deal. So if you take a look at it, it's only 14 pages. It's a nice start. It's a beginning for the discussion, but it's not the end of the discussion. We all get to have a discussion about what we want this to be and what we want to be doing in terms of decarbonizing our buildings, decarbonizing our transportation systems, and as those of you who read that 100 billion tons of Greenland ice just melted in one day, that we need to figure out sea level rise and how we're going to address that. So we want to make sure the Green New Deal is transparent, inclusive, collaborative, includes labor unions, vulnerable communities. Lowest income communities are generally on the front lines of climate change and pollution. Let's make sure we address their issues as well. Worker cooperatives, civil society groups, academia, and business. So we're looking for good jobs for all, democratic economy, and a good life for all. So I said that the 14-page Green New Deal resolution is this general framework. It doesn't have a lot of details. The framers of it knew that if they got too specific too early, that they would lose a lot of groups. So they wanted to keep it purposefully general. And then I had been working on this book for 2 years, researching and writing it. I was ready to publish in March when AOC and Ed Markey announced the Green New Deal in February. And I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. They need details. My book has details. So I want to share with you the framework of what I developed as part of this, fortunately, as part of this conversation. So from my perspective, the Green New Deal is important because we have a crisis in the world of work. We're hearing so many days, the unemployment rate's 3.7%, it's the lowest it's been a generation, everything's great, the GDP keeps growing, this is great. Well, those of us with half of a brain know that we've been seeing outsourcing for decades. Our middle-class jobs have been going overseas. Those of us who are paying attention understand what's happening with automation. A lot of jobs in manufacturing are being automated. 4.2 million people drive for a living, and Elon Musk is working on autonomous vehicles, self-driving vehicles, for tractor trailers, for delivery vans, for taxis. And he's saying, we're just going to have to give people universal basic income. Everyone needs income to be able to afford housing and food and healthcare. And 4 million people within a decade could be out of work. I think we can do better than that. I think we need to be thinking about what kind of jobs we want to see created for people that need to happen. We also have the gig economy, where a lot of people are piecing together a few different part-time gigs with no benefits in order to be able to pay their basic expenses, and this is leaving a lot of people anxious. And then there's low levels of employee engagement. People who do have jobs, who are gainfully employed, only about 32% of them are actively engaged at work. Almost 70% don't like their jobs, and if they could find another one, they would leave as soon as possible. So I think there's a crisis in the world of work, and that we could do better. Meanwhile, there's all this work that needs to happen to build a sustainable future. The Green New Deal is talking about decarbonizing our energy and transportation systems, which is the first two, but we also need a circular economy. Does anybody know if China wants our garbage anymore? We've been shipping it to China for decades. Do they want our trash? They don't want our trash anymore. They want to be seen as an economic powerhouse, not the dumping ground for American garbage. So we could be building a circular economy here, a regional recycling economy, better composting facilities, do more waste prevention. Which leads me to the fourth of 5 areas, reducing food waste. Does anybody know what percentage of all the food we raise and grow is thrown away in this country? 40%. Oh, you guys are amazing. 40%. No excuse for that. There's so much work we could be doing to create good jobs to reduce food waste. And then there's restoring nature. You mentioned the wildfires. We have 147 million dead trees in California. We could be managing our forests better. We need healthier waterways. Does anybody know what, I bet you guys do know this, what percentage of wildlife we've lost since 1970 has disappeared? Globally. It's not in the single digits. It's 60%. We have lost 60% of all wildlife since 1970. And I don't think that's acceptable to anybody who knows those numbers. So there's all this work that needs to be done where we could be employing millions of people. People want meaningful work. There's this idea in Japan. It's called, the term is ikigai, which means reason for living. And people in the Okinawa prefecture have some of the longest life expectancies in the world because people well into their 11th decade feel useful in their communities. So if you see ikigai through the lens of the American work culture, those of us who are doing work we love, that the world needs, that someone will pay us for, and we're good at, have ikigai at work. And I wish more people felt this, whether they're right out of school, they're mid-career, or they just retired and they still have a lot of energy. The fourth crisis that I feel like we face is it's a good thing and it's a challenge. The financial industry is going to these global climate conferences and saying, put us to work. We want to help. We want to help build a sustainable future, but there aren't enough funds, there aren't enough business plans, there aren't enough shovel-ready projects for us to invest in. Put us to work. I'm seeing in private equity some really cool projects happening, but as you know, private equity is for those with a lot of money already. Normal folks aren't necessarily able to invest in these kinds of things, but Generate Capital out of San Francisco just invested $5 million in 6 microgrids in Salinas in the public school system. And so they now have solar and energy storage and monitoring communications and controls equipment, EV charging, so that if the power ever goes down, these schools that serve the children of migrant laborers don't have to spend an hour getting from the fields to make sure their kids are okay. They'll have uninterrupted power, and it's cleaner. Farmland LP is another interesting project from private equity. $500,000 minimum investment, so I can't get in on this. But what Farmland LP is doing is buying up conventionally grown commodity cropland and converting it to organic agriculture to grow produce. There are cool projects going on out there. There just aren't enough of them, and the financial sector would like to be able to help. So in my book, I talk about 30 different projects that we need that would create millions of jobs for people. It's a lot more focused on small businesses, helping aspiring entrepreneurs start businesses, the nonprofit sector, and the government sector. So you can take a look at these later, but these projects encompass all kinds of different talents. We do need the engineers, we need the architects, but we also need the salespeople and the marketing people. We need people with all kinds of skill sets to get involved with this. A few examples would be solar emergency microgrids. Every hospital, every police station, every fire station should have a solar emergency microgrid where they have solar, batteries, EV charging, and once the big earthquake at some point hits, they could island from the grid and still function, still respond to the community. There are hospitals who are going around and counting circuits right now to try to figure out, after a natural disaster, what do we absolutely need running? We need an emergency room that functions. We need one operating room. We need intensive care units running. We need this number of lights. And then they figure out how many solar panels, how big of a battery system would we need in order to power that. Building deconstruction, I love the story. The city of Portland a few years ago said, we just saw 300 old houses go down last year. 300 houses built before 1916, torn down and replaced, and basically demolition just smashes them, pushes them over into a 40 cubic yard dumpster and hauls them to the landfill. And the city of Portland said, People are throwing away solid oak wood flooring, wood banisters, clawfoot tubs, kitchen cabinets, sinks, when they could be reclaiming them and using them in new projects. So they said, you can't demolish a house anymore from before 1916. You have to deconstruct it, and we're going to give a $2,500 grant for these projects to close the differential between what demolition and deconstruction costs. And as a result of this, 2 new deconstruction firms started up, and there was a training for 14 people, 2 of whom had just come out of prison, 7 of whom had been formerly homeless, and they trained them over 3 days on basically how to do it, and then they practiced on the job. And you know what? If you learn how to deconstruct a building, you're kind of learning about how to construct a building as well. So this is the kind of leadership we need to be able to build the sustainable future. We need to make it easier for people to start businesses. So these are private sector green jobs that we need. Here are some nonprofit sector green jobs we need. Reverse catering is basically a nonprofit like Replate. They're in San Francisco and many other cities around the country. So if Salesforce has a conference and they have 300 pounds of extra couscous salad left over afterwards, they can go on the app and say, we'd like a pickup within an hour. And then someone like Matt Stepanovich drives over, picks it up, and delivers it to the homeless shelter in Emeryville. We need a lot more organizations like this to reclaim some of this 40% of the food that's wasted. Carbon farming, wildlife defense. There are a lot of stories in my book about proof of concept that we need to be scaling up. And then there are 13 of these 30 projects that just aren't going to happen unless government leads it. Now, these may be collaborations between the public sector, private sector, and nonprofit sector, like those who are restoring the San Francisco Bay Area so that wildlife can move back in, and to take those Cargill salt ponds and restore them into wildlife habitat. There are many examples here. We need more safe bicycling infrastructure so people feel comfortable getting out of their cars to bike around for their errands and to get to work. I think every town should have a tool lending library and repair cafe and makerspace. As someone whose son is going off to college in a few weeks, we've had a lot of battles about get off your device, stop looking at screens, go outside, do something else. He loves to play and tinker and build things. And if we had more repair cafes, I know we have them, but they're just not often enough, and we had more maker spaces, it would give kids alternative things to do that would be constructive and help them be creative instead of just consuming someone else's content. So that's the vision I have. These are the projects I'd like to see happen. People are asking for a specific plan. We need to do something to address those on the front lines of the crisis. And let's see, what time is it? Could you take 2 minutes to talk to someone else near you, someone different from whom you just talked to? What is important to you in a Green Deal? Green New Deal.
Are you going to have people? You going to have people comment from the audience?
I would like to hear from 3 people in the audience. What's
okay,
important to you
I'll walk
in
the
a Green
mic
New
to
Deal?
them. So,
okay.
As soon as you say, who's going to want to talk first?
Does anyone want to share? What's important to you in a Green New Deal?
Well, it's important that the people who have been put out of work by automation be retrained to do the jobs that we're going to need coming up. So the planners can find out what needs doing and spread around the information, and maybe higher education, right? The post-high school stuff that people aren't thinking about now. If people want to learn to do something new, then give them a chance.
Thank you for bringing up that issue. That's so interesting to me. So I interviewed a county commissioner in coal country in western Pennsylvania, and coal mining only employs 52,000 people at this point, and it's being automated. It's not just a war on coal, as we're being told by the EPA. It's people's jobs are being automated out of existence. Meanwhile, there's $3 million coming from the Department of Labor to train people for new jobs in Greene County, western Pennsylvania, but the training that they're offering is programming software, which I just don't feel is the best possible alternative for people working heavy equipment who know all about hydraulics and electrical systems and trucks. So that's interesting. And I'm also seeing there's an opportunity to take some of the workforce development funding coming from Sacramento down to the community colleges for workforce training, $1 billion, which is going to train people for low-wage jobs that most people don't want. I'm seeing a lot of training. There was a list of 20 items at Foothills College. None of them are green. None of them are green jobs. So to take another look at the workforce development training money, what it's being used for, and what kinds of jobs we want in the future will be really interesting. Because right now the workforce development funding is for jobs that currently exist, for which people are not trained. But if nothing on that list is green, then we could be having conversation about that. You got a comment?
Yeah, I was thinking, one of the things that bugs me a lot is the amount of plastic in the world, and we should be doing some research to substitute all that packing material that comes in plastic and try to get rid of the plastic we've dumped in the oceans and in the forests and wherever.
Okay, so I'm hearing from you what's important to you is that in a Green New Deal that we somehow address the single-use disposable material economy that we have. Any other comments? What's important to you in a Green New Deal?
What's important to me is a plan to generate enough clean energy to accomplish all of the things you're talking about. And we need a plan that's been proven by science and statistics that will be able to provide this energy.
That we need enough renewable energy to provide all of our...
renewable energy, clean energy.
Clean energy. Ah, I see.
There's a difference.
Right. And I think we're having a discussion about that as a society, about what we want that to look like.
Yes.
Now that the state of California has set these increasingly ambitious goals to reduce greenhouse gases and address climate change. So that's interesting. Did you have a comment? What's important to you in the Green New Deal?
I think it would be important to divert some of the money from the military budget into all of these efforts. I understand that more than 50% of our national economy is involved in the military budget. And so if we could reduce that just 10%, that might pay for a lot of things.
It's one chapter I took out of this book because it was just so angry and bitter was follow the money. Like we seem to have unlimited funding for military and weapons and prisons and border control and surveillance, but when someone talks about building and having a Green New Deal, we can't find the funding. So part of this is about writing your elected representatives and expressing your support for a Green New Deal that would help us stabilize the climate and create a livable environment for future generations.
How many people do you want to talk? Do you want to go more further? More people? You said 3 when you started. That's the reason I asked.
Yes, we're good. And now I want to move on. So our plan to win from these sunrise movements. Climate change is happening every day and getting worse. There's finally a solution on the table that rises the scale of the crisis, a Green New Deal. So their strategy is expose the urgency of the crisis, which I think they're doing a good job with, relentlessly demand the solutions we need. And so 2019 is about building support for a Green New Deal and pressuring candidates and elected officials. I've talked to 3 different state assembly members, state senators, and then representatives, House of Representatives folks about my support for the Green New Deal. And what I'm hearing from them is, of course we support it. What do you want? Like, give us some specific legislation. Tell us what specifically you want us to run up the flagpole, and we'll do it. You probably know in California we're the only state that doesn't have an oil and gas severance tax. So of fossil fuels that are extracted in California and off the coast, we're the only state that doesn't tax it. Back in February, Bob Wieckowski, the state senator from Fremont, proposed an oil and gas severance tax, and he said, let's take the funds and put it into the general fund. I would love to see those funds instead go towards decarbonizing our economy. So the more you speak up, the more you ask your legislators for something specific, the more likely they'll be to do something about it. So then we're having a climate debate September 4th. It's a climate town hall, not a climate debate actually. So that's coming up. We're trying to change the debate basically to get more attention for this. So hashtag change the debate. Is anyone on social media? Active on social media? Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. It's a powerful tool. It's Twitter can be kind of a... What's that? I know. I wish I could give like a 1-hour class. There's a lot to it, and Twitter can quickly become a cesspool. So you have to know like how to jump in and when to and when not to, and how not to get into certain areas. So watch for it September 4th, Climate Change Town Hall. If you want to get involved with Sunrise, here's the information. We're trying to build a Green New Deal coalition, and I'd like to open it up for your questions and comments.
Thank you. I have 3 questions, but they are closely related. First, it's all great ideas. Most of them are not really new. The question is how to pay for them. Second is that the power of purse belongs to the Congress, as we all know. So in order to ensure that if we hope that there will be some central funding for these projects, we want the Congress to pass this legislation. And GND includes so many ideas that would unlikely win the bipartisan support. And at the same time, they don't include the ideas like carbon fee and dividend that would probably pass bipartisan. Just a sec. And number 3, what would be really useful for local implementations of these ideas is not only money, but a sort of like knowledge base, life knowledge base about all the experience, how people implement all these different ideas locally that could be available free to everyone.
So mainly what I heard you say is, how are we going to pay for this? And you'll notice that of the 30 projects that were up here, some were private sector, some were nonprofit sector, and some were public sector. So the private sector ones are the ones with the return on investment, where with investment that there would be savings that could accrue back to the original investor. So I would like to see all kinds of different tools be employed to help support people who are brave enough to start a business. It's not just commercial bank loans. You can do bootstrapping. The man I told you about who started the deconstruction firm in Portland, one of the two firms. He looked into a commercial bank loan. He needed $10,000. He was a graphic designer. He said, I'm going to be paying $100 a month for interest on this $10,000 loan. I'm just going to pull it out of my own savings. And so he bootstrapped. He kept his costs low. He bought a junky old pickup truck. He bought a few $1,000s worth of tools. He got workman's comp. And he started hiring friends and friends of friends. And now he's selling $23,000 a month of salvage wood out of the 2x4s from the framing. And he's hired 6 people. So bootstrapping is an option. Crowdfunding is an option. You've heard of Kickstarter is for products, but there are all kinds of crowdfunding sites where you can say, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. Can you support me? And I'll pay you back this way. There are direct public offerings. There are lines of credit. There are all kinds of ways to bootstrap a business. But really, until we have universal health care, where everybody has health care that's not tied to their job, we're not really supporting aspiring entrepreneurs. Because think about it, if you're in a job that you don't really like, but you're staying in it because someone in the household has to have health care, it's going to be hard for you to leave that. And so having universal health care would help support the aspiring entrepreneurs who want to make the break and start a green business to be able to feel like they could hold onto the trapeze and swing over to the other platform. So that's for the private sector. Nonprofit sector generally depends on crowdfunding and philanthropy, but that's not the whole solution. Part of it is also the government. I mean, as I said before, we seem to have unlimited funds for the military, for prisons, for surveillance, for border control, and weapons, and yet when it comes time to do something that's going to save the planet, we can't find funding. I think we can find funding, and the more people speak up and say, this is a priority for me, and tell your elected officials, the more likely it will be. Next question?
I'm curious what states you went to and how receptive they were to this, because I have the impression that a great part of our country is not receptive.
So you mean the Sunrise Movement, which states they went to? There were town halls around the country, and they're looking to broaden their list of collaborators, your allies, and that's why they're making sure that they also mention issues that affect different racial groups, different socioeconomic groups. They want to make sure that labor's included. It's still a touchy issue, the Blue-Green Alliance, because a lot of people see this as a threat to their jobs, those who work in the fossil fuel industry, who work in some of the more polluting industries. Government's the one who could provide the training, who could help ease that transition, because it needs to include a broad coalition. And so that's really been a focus from the beginning of the Sunrise Movement. They had town halls. I can't say every state, but I know it's been all around the country, and I'm not sure exactly where those 200 town halls were, but it's not just in California.
Okay, but people are open to it countrywide?
Are people open to it throughout the country? I hear what you're saying. In more conservative areas, are they supportive? I can't really answer that. I'm presuming the broad coalition is going well, but there is a certain framing going on through Fox News. The people I've found that have heard of Green New Deal have heard of it because they've heard of it on Fox News and they don't have a good opinion of it. That's why we have between now and the election in 2020 to have these discussions about the possibilities of what it could be. Great question. Thank you.
Hi. Yes. I see the Green New Deal as a top-level grand vision, sort of a top-down view of things, and the kinds of projects you're proposing are more of a bottom-up approach. And it seems to me we need to find that middle ground where the two get together. It seems that the projects that you're proposing, if they could come to the knowledge of people in Congress, something more concrete that they can apply funds to, that would be awesome.
I feel like I have more, you're talking about grassroots support for the projects that I outlined here in my book, and the more top-down approach that the Green New Deal coming from the federal level would have. I'm hoping the federal level Green New Deal happens. I'm not 100% convinced it will, but I'm glad we're having the discussion. Meanwhile, I'm working with community colleges on green jobs accelerators, green entrepreneur accelerators to provide the platform for people to meet other aspiring entrepreneurs, get the business skills they need, the potential funding they need to start their businesses. And so I am more focused on the grassroots effort, and I'm hopeful for the federal effort, but given the current climate in DC, things could flip next year. We'll see. Please get involved, get people out to vote. My husband and I were just discussing this morning, okay, are we going to go drive people to the polls in Kentucky or Wisconsin next November? We get to have this discussion in the next year, so please do get involved. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. Our military spending is more than $500 billion. So I was wondering, like, the military helps with the disaster issues. Why not use the military personnel for doing plantation of trees and stopping the deforestation? So divert some of those resources as well as build, like they build all these weapons and all this stuff. Why not divert those resources within the military, within the Pentagon budget to do some of the research work to stop, because it is a disaster issues. So looking at it from that perspective, why there is no push from the Congress or from people like yourself to divert some of those military resources to do all these kind of climate change issues to address?
Her question was, can we ask the military to divert some of its resources? It's over $700 billion a year now goes to the military to plant trees and do research and some of these things. So $700 billion a year sounds bad, but it's even worse than that. So I found out that every year the president sends the budget to Congress and asks for a certain amount, and every year it's more for the Department of Defense. And every year Congress gives them $40–60 billion more than they asked for. And I called up the Appropriations Committee that oversees this, and I asked, I think I was just talking to a receptionist, I said, why do you all give $40–60 billion a year more than the DOD even asked for? And she kind of laughed and she said, well, I guess people don't want to be seen as soft on defense. And I said, why is it soft on defense to just give them what they asked for? Like, I hear you, it seems maddening. At the same time, the Pentagon gets it, and they've gotten it for years. That climate change is a destabilizing geopolitical force, and it's coming, and they feel like they need even more money to shore up their own military bases. We've got 843 military bases around the world that we're spending tens of billions of dollars on. I just wonder if it's possible to pick away at some of that funding. You know, the overseas military bases many of them started as coal resupply depots. So when Navy ships were sailing around the world, they needed somewhere to load up on coal. And so these were just places where there was coal and they could load it on the ship and keep going. And now there are these enormous fortresses that we've spent all this money on. So it's a question worth asking, again, of your elected officials. Why are we spending so much money on 843 overseas military bases when we've got a climate change emergency here? And we also need funding for a Green New Deal that would help decarbonize our energy and transportation systems.
Okay, here are two quick things. The first one was Army Corps of Engineers. That's just a general thing that seems like it could be brought to bear here. And my quick question was, what is this carbon farming?
What is carbon? I'm sorry, I didn't get about the Army Corps of Engineers. What were you asking about that? Or saying?
Well, basically, that the Army Corps of Engineers seems like a ready resource of people who are already, well, they're a Corps of Engineers, so they could be helping.
So the Army Corps, you're making the statement, the Army Corps of Engineers could be deployed to work on climate resilience, infrastructure,
right?
Putting up barriers around,
or
San Francisco or New York.
Doing whatever it is that engineers do, right?
And what was the second part of your question?
I'm wondering, One of the things that was on one of your
what's carbon
slides
farming?
was carbon farming.
Carbon farming, yes. So planting trees is one way to sequester carbon. We can do big, fancy, expensive engineering projects for carbon sequestration. Carbon farming is a lot of different methods to take carbon out of the air and sequester it into the soil. And so even just laying a 1/4 to 1/2 inch of compost on an acre of land where you have grasslands means that the grass is going to sink much deeper roots. It wouldn't last for millions of years, but UC Berkeley researchers are working with different farmers and ranchers and recipients of grants from the Healthy Soils Initiative from the state of California. It was $7 million the first year, $0 the second year, $14 million last year. They're using public funds to test it out and see how much carbon is actually sequestered in the roots of plants through carbon farming. There's a great book by Eric Tonesmeyer about the carbon farming solution, it's called, and he's a professor at Yale, and he talks about silvopasture is really the highest carbon sequestration option of carbon farming, and that's where you have trees and cows, and the manure fertilizes the trees, and then the trees sequester the carbon. There are all these options that aren't big, fancy, technical engineering feats, but rather would give more funding to our farmers and our ranchers. So it's a whole discipline, and I urge you to take a look at it. Any other questions?
You mentioned the importance of preparing for disruption due to natural causes, losing our communication or electrical system. Added to that is the possibility that foreign actors can also disrupt, as they have in the recent elections. So our power distribution, communications are very vulnerable, and we do need to prepare for that.
Our power and communications and infrastructure are vulnerable. We should prepare for that. Was that a statement? Or?
Just to amplify what you said.
Yes.
Natural disasters.
I agree. And we need to figure out, each community needs to figure out which community assets are most important to us. Do we want to make sure are functioning in a clean, decarbonized way when natural disasters do strike, as they seem to be striking more often? And earthquake is the big issue here, and wildfires is the big issue here. So what do we need functioning in that event? Thank you for amplifying that.